Hey, welcome back, everybody. Welcome to season 3. And man, do I have a guest, or let me rephrase that. I have guests for you that are very interesting and very funny. Just from the start of this, I should have started recording this because this would have made a great blooper reel to show later on. I'd like to first thank my guest Nick Lozano and Brian Comerford for taking time out of the busy schedule to spend some time with me. And welcome, gentlemen, to Change Your Mindset podcast.
Thanks for having us on, Peter.
I have to admit to the audience, I'm surprised they accepted my invitation because I was on their podcast. And after we were done, I didn't think they would ever come on my podcast. They were just like, oh, well, who is this crazy guy?
Anyone who calls himself the accidental accountant and has a podcast called Change Your Mindset, you're right up my alley.
I appreciate that. And with your guys' background, I love your interview style. You guys did a great job. And once again, I'll thank Roxanne Kaufman-Elliott for the introduction. Plug. And how did you guys come about? What were you guys sitting around one day? Because, Brian, you're in Colorado and Nick's in D.C. Did you guys just come around one day and just find each other and go, hey, I got a great idea. Let's start a podcast.
Well, on the 7th day, no. So Brian and I met each other through my day job, which I run a CIO Mastermind working group, which Brian is actually a member of. And the podcast kind of started just basically with Brian and I having conversations, either before the conference or after the conference. It just kind of turned into a point. It was like, man, we should probably just record this. Brian has a broadcasting background, and I have a broadcast, not broadcasting. Jeez, give myself credentials I don't have. I have an audio background. I've produced a couple podcasts for my day job and things in the past, and done some audio work when I was in high school. So it was just kind of a match made in heaven, and Brian and I can talk forever, I guess. Yeah.
Is that valid, Brian?
It is valid. Yeah. So, Nick and I think there was, we'll call it harmonic resonance from the outset. It's the kind of thing where he and I think just kind of play off each other very naturally in just an ordinary conversation, but in particular in the working group that he referred to. Just the interaction that we had, the amount of topics that we fielded, I think kind of the perspectives that we had that we felt were both valid, but also kind of coming from directions that were maybe not as conventional as some of the other members of the working group. And it felt like something where, there was an opportunity for us to really explore this and kind of open it up into more of a community setting or a public setting. But I've got to credit Nick because he's really the one that came forward and he said, we're doing a lot of talking here that could be valuable to others. Why don't we just create a podcast? Let's just do it. And, following his lead, we jumped in, and I'm so thankful that we have, because we've been doing it for a little over a year now. And it's been hugely gratifying, and it's just great, to get feedback from the audience that we've been able to develop over time.
That's cool. So just in case those who are listening to this kind of went fast forwarded through the introduction, give the audience just a little bit of your background. And we'll start with Nick.
Okay. So I like to say how I got into technology. I walked into a room, and that's really not a joke. I walked into a room. So to give a little bit of background on myself, when I first got out of high school, I did paint and body work. I was an auto mechanic guy. And then I decided I didn't want to huff fumes anymore. That was bad for my health. Who would think breathing in dust would be bad for you? So then I kind of went back to college, and I was working in restaurants. I was a professional chef for a little while. Worked at different hotels and resorts during my time. And, I just decided I had to do something different. And I always had this knack and interest in technology. So I went to community college and kind of just got a general AA, which is how I recommend everyone to go to college. Get a general AA, get as cheap as you can, and then go to a state school. So I did that, and then lo and behold, here I'm at the University of Central Florida, and I have to declare a major because I'm rising junior, and they're like, well, you need to decide what you're going to do. And this one guy walks by, he's a professor. He's like, you don't know what you want to do? He's like, just come with me to this room. And lo and behold, I became a management of information systems student. So that's kind of how I got into technology. And then I've worked in roles at consulting firms. I own a small boutique consulting firm, and then I wound up where I am now. So I'm kind of like you, Peter. I accidentally wound up where I am. I don't know how I wound up here, but here I am.
So where you are now, and according to your LinkedIn page, you're the janitor where?
I'm the janitor. It's very long. I'm the janitor at the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers. It's an insurance trade association in Washington, D.C.
And just for the record, because I've seen it a couple places, so I had to go validate it. And I went out to this website and was snooping around and found out that you're actually not the janitor. You're the director of technology with a great sense of humor.
Well, if you look at my LinkedIn profile, it actually has my current job listed as a janitor. And it's even my tagline. I just don't ever take myself seriously. And the whole janitor thing came up with a conversation I had with people on LinkedIn. I was like, I wonder how many people would actually have conversations with me if they just thought I was a janitor. And the one thing it's actually done is driven people to my profile, because I'll be on LinkedIn talking about leadership or podcasting or something. They're like, wait, this guy's a janitor? Like, no way. And then lo and behold, I had a conversation with somebody today, and they're like, okay, so like, why'd you make it a janitor? I was like, I don't know. I just want to see if somebody would talk to me. It's an experiment. I'm a highly curious individual. And they go on and on. They're like, okay, well, I'm looking at your profile. So what are you trying to sell? Like, I'm not trying to sell anything. I just thought it'd be funny,
Just selling cleaning materials. Want to buy some?
Exactly. Well, LinkedIn is still the internet, right? So,
cool. Brian, what about your background?
So I got into technology from a pretty oblique path myself. I was very interested in electronic music from a young age. I got a synthesizer and a drum machine the same year that MIDI came out. And that was really the beginning of learning how to cobble together technical equipment and pass signal from one thing to another. And pretty soon I was working in a sequencing emulator in an old Atari personal computer. And pretty quickly discovered that of all the kids I knew, I was one of the most technical, although I never considered myself a technical person. I've always been an artist, honestly. I'm the son of a couple of artists and a writer. And, I really thought that I would go off and write screenplays and make movies, do filmmaking. And all, through my academic background, initially, that is exactly what I did. I learned film arts, I learned screenwriting. I worked more and more with technical equipment, really creating things using software, and kind of learned, a lot about how you can apply automation principles within sort of an artistic context. Well, I never thought that was going to lead into a deeper and deeper technical career. But in the mid 90s, I got really intrigued at a time that I was a DJ and a broadcast producer. I got really intrigued by something called real audio. And I started talking to other people about it. I said, hey, this is really cool. There's this thing now where you can actually stream audio on the web, and no one cared. And but I was really fascinated with it. I just happened to be producing a program that a couple of my co-producers and I wrote a grant to get a real producer license, and started webcasting our program. And that really kind of started me in, this whole internet radio thing right at the beginning of kind of the swell of the .com wave. And, how could I possibly have seen that I'd be getting into one of the most volatile industries with everything that happened with the music industry? But I got really deep into everything that was going on with digital distribution in the music industry throughout the remainder of the 90s. Went through my own bouts of litigation as many, audio companies did. Not for doing anything wrong, but just because that became the main play for the Record Industry Association of America. It was
right.
Sue everybody. That'll slow this down.
Yeah.
And
that works.
about the time that I was bottomed out financially, I thought, it's probably a good time to go back to grad school and get credentials for all this stuff that I've been doing for the last decade. So I did, and I went and got a master's degree in digital media, and I've been doing a lot of independent consulting myself. Around that time, I had a friend who was a law clerk at a commercial insurance brokerage. And he said, hey, I work for this company that you never heard of in an industry that you didn't know existed. But they need someone like you to come fix all this stuff with their technology. And I thought it would be, something like kind of a cool consulting engagement. And 15 years later, it's what I've been doing for, a long damn time now. But it's fortunate in that, that is the work that ultimately led me to be a member of the CIO Mastermind group that Nick has been steering for many years now, and to be able to collaborate with him and ultimately, come to co-produce Lead.exe together.
That's cool. So you've mentioned the CIO working group. So, and it's a mastermind group. So what's the conversation like when you guys get together and have when you're masterminding? What topics are discussed? What do you guys talk about?
You would think that getting everybody together would be them talking about what customer relationship management system they're going to use, right? But it never really gets to that. I think the big topic, that we've seen the last couple of years is talent acquisition and talent development, right, Brian? They're like, okay, well, data science is big. We bought all this, software to do data science. Now we just need somebody to do it. Where do we find these people who do this? And that's been a big trend. And I would say cybersecurity, and anything related around cybersecurity lately is a hot topic issue.
Well, and I would also say that, something Nick and I have both been really passionate about is what often get termed the soft skills, right?
Right.
And that's critical for anyone who's in a leadership role. It doesn't matter if you're a leader in technology. It doesn't matter if you're a leader in, a business segment. Sorry, I'm going to give pause for a second because there's some kind of jet going overhead. I don't know if you can do that.
I can. Are you near the Denver airport?
No, I'm close to Buckley Air Force Base, though. It's not an active airstrip. I mean, Air Force One flies into it.
Oh,
but,
there you go. Coming in to pick up some weed and go back.
That's right. Got to drain the swamp, but got to get the right mindset first.
Well, I didn't know it was this kind of change your mind, I guess.
So, Ben and you guys, this clip you can clip out with the airplane and stuff.
All right. Well, sorry about that.
No worries.
So Nick and I have been, really interested in these areas that, even though they get qualified as soft skills a lot, we don't really consider them soft skills. We consider them essential leadership skills. And that ended up being something that pretty quickly we realized was really a sort of top agenda item, working group after working group. And for us, it's been great because it's given us opportunities to schedule bringing in facilitators really to help conduct leadership training. And then, we also develop a structured agenda before every working group so that we can do our best to kind of, herd cats and keep everything on track.
So it's interesting to bring up talent development and cybersecurity, because in the world that I primarily deal with accounting and finance professionals, talent development, talent retention, talent attraction seems to be either one or two for the past 5 years. And some organizations have figured it out. Some are still thinking it's 1980.
They're going to get the gold watch at retirement, right?
Yeah, and it just boggles my mind sometimes that we get a pretty large workforce out there that's coming in who don't act like us. I'm a baby boomer, and who don't operate in the same mindset that we do, but we expect them to morph into our world when really we should be creating an environment that attracts them to stay in our world versus repel them out.
Mm-hmm.
You guys seen the same thing?
Oh,
See
sure.
the same thing, and I know what word everyone thinks of as soon as they say this is that dreaded M word.
I hate that word.
I
It's
hate
one
it.
of Nick's favorite words.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it is my favorite word by far. Which is funny because sometimes I'm in that generation, sometimes I'm not, being born in '82. But when I always think of people are always criticizing the millennial generation, they've kind of been a punching bag, and now it's kind of shifting to that Gen Z, right? They're now
Yeah.
the Gen Z starting to be part of that punching bag. But I always say that, older generations have always criticized younger generations since the beginning of time. I always bring it back to this one quote. It's they think they know everything and they are quite sure about it. You know who said that?
Who said that?
That was Aristotle in the Rhetoric in 4th BC. So,
Wow.
I mean, we're talking about since the beginning of time. And what I always tell people is when you hear these things about millennials, take the word millennial off of it and just put people, right?
Yeah.
People love to work for a purpose. People love to know what they're working for. People love to know they have a path for career growth. People just love to do that. And I think what we're seeing is that over time, the internet has just made it easier to find like-minded people.
Mm-hmm.
Where previous generations didn't have, instantly to post something on Reddit and saying how they feel, or Twitter, and somebody could see it instantly in real time. Now these younger generations can find those people more easily, and I think their voice is just being heard. I don't think we're seeing anything new, at least in my opinion, that wasn't there before. It's just more front and center. And before, leaders were just kind of like, well, I hired Johnny over here and we pay him well, so he'll just stay here for 20 years and we won't worry about developing him, talent wise, turning him into a leader, actually caring about our people. We don't need to worry about that because he'll just stay here for 20 years.
Well,
Brian?
I'll chime in and say that I fall squarely in Gen X. And the first time that I remember someone in our organization referring to millennials, and they had sort of this list of things that we had to be aware about, because these were the behaviors, the expectations, and these different things. I looked at it and I thought, there's not a single thing here that doesn't describe me. But I also, consider myself to be more socially progressive. I've also been, very involved in the evolution in technology, and, have been with the web since its release in 1993. So it's something that, has just always been part of my own set of behavioral characteristics. So to then suddenly hear that there's this demographic qualifier made me realize that really we've got sort of this segment of the population that just didn't know what time it is. And, now they've been caught off guard by, a whole demographic of, you call them digital natives pretty typically, right? It's just people who are really comfortable living in an interconnected world that, where linking things via hypertext is, there's nothing revolutionary about it. I mean, that's actually a qualifier for how people start to think and interact. And, it's a social media context becomes part of just your social context. So all of those things to me, there was nothing revolutionary going on other than suddenly a demographic of people suddenly woke up to the fact that, whoa, wait a second, things have changed. And, there's kind of two impulses. One is, I'm change averse by nature, therefore I want to try to put a stop to this.
Right.
It's impossible to do, right? And so if I can't put a stop to it, I'm going to criticize it. Or if people are going to take it and try to bake it into part of their own, personal set of behavioral characteristics. And I think we've started to see, more of an awareness that, change is just going to continue to come. Figuring out how do we imbue that change in, things that either from a business perspective or from a talent acquisition perspective, right? How do we bring those things and make it part of, the collective demographic versus it's an us and them kind of thing? We're still sort of in that gray zone navigating through a lot of that, but it feels like it's improving.
I think it's an improvement. If you think about the baby boomer, when they entered the workforce, their bosses were the greatest generation, right?
Mm-hmm.
The silent generation, how we describe them. And those folks went through the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
They went through very tough times in this country. And then here come the baby boomers. Let's see, Make Love, Not War, Haight-Ashbury, the whole drug scene and the Vietnam War and the counterculture. They forget that because
Mm-hmm.
they were the older generation was looking at them. What is that music? Who's that Elvis Presley guy? And stuff, and looked at them in the same way that the boomers are always, kind of looking at the younger generation. And, I think I realized when I was teaching at Ohio Dominican University, when my group of seniors were going out into the workforce, I'd take them aside and I'd give them a little piece of advice, but they were talented. I said, stuff that my peers have no clue.
Mm-hmm.
And they know stuff that you have no clue. Find a way to build the bridge. Don't look at anybody any differently, but just know that you've got talents that they don't have, and they got talents that you don't have. And if you can align them together, you'll come out at the end. And just try to take that stereotype out. But oh my God, if I hear another person, them millennials. Yeah, those millennials are multi-billionaires. I don't know, some guy named Zuckerberg or something like that, and who've created these organizations that tend to grow and thrive. And oh, by the way, has anybody been to Sears lately? I mean, so I think that's kind of how it's all. But we do need to change that mindset to be more inclusive and realize that my son's a Gen Z.
Mm-hmm.
And he's mastering it because he's a Gen Z. He's going to sleep his way to the top.
Yeah.
So what are the challenges do you see in your world out there that people are talking a lot about outside of the talent and development? And obviously cybersecurity will always be there, but in this leadership soft skill genre.
I would say emotional intelligence just in general, right, Brian?
For sure.
As technology leaders are always very keen on their technical skills. They keep up with what Amazon's doing, what Microsoft's doing, what the latest coding language is. But they spend very little time looking at research about, any emotional intelligence, self-awareness, meditation, breath work. Like none of that stuff nobody ever looks at. And that's kind of our thinking with bringing our podcast. Really, our podcast could be just a leadership podcast, but we're tech guys and we gear it towards tech people because we know that these issues don't come forefront to them. And the easy emotional intelligence one, I think it's self-awareness, right? We go back to the boomer millennial thing, Gen Z. It's just being aware that you possibly have some biases, right? Being in a certain generation, being older, looking down at younger generations or younger generations looking up at older generations saying, well, not looking at them for their experience, tapping into their experience to get some advice or some information. I would say for me, self-awareness and caring are two big things I see lacking in leaders in general.
Right.
Yeah, and I think a component of that, we were kind of poking fun at Nick earlier for having janitor as his job title in LinkedIn, but part of that mindset we referred to for years is the custodial mindset. And so within the business, there tends to be this perception that anyone who's working in IT, right, they're the trolls in the back room. Like we only summon them when we really need something or something needs to be fixed or cleaned up, right? But in terms of inviting them to have a seat at the table and be thought leaders in our organization, it tends not to be at the forefront of companies that aren't tech companies to begin with, right?
Right.
So part of that self-awareness is the understanding that actually today in the 21st century, we're all tech companies and we're all data companies, and actually having our tech leadership very close to the executive leadership, having that seat at the table, it's really critical to help ensure that your business is evolving and transforming in the way that it needs to. So that's another component that, we, I think it ends up being a topic that we arrive at pretty frequently, whether or not it's something that, for instance, in our working group ends up being an overt agenda item. It's one that just continually comes up.
When I mentioned emotional intelligence or do a session on emotional intelligence to finance and accounting professionals, I get this, oh dear God, I mean, this is going to be just, this is the touchy feely stuff. And,
Yes.
and then I watch these for these emotions, this body language. And I think I said this on your guys' podcast. Then I'll ask them this question. By the way, guys, what business are you in? We're in accounting, finance, we're in auditing, we're tax. No, that's not the business that you are in. That's a byproduct of what you're in. And I tried to get them just a little bit agitated enough. Now you're in the people business.
Mm-hmm.
And that's first and foremost in every business that's out there. There's the people business. In order to be better at your business, you have to understand yourself as a person and your organization as people. And that brings in the importance of emotional intelligence. And that's what the big thing is. And it's starting to resonate with them. But I don't think that Sheldon Cooper type of character mentality, the way they've crafted him in the Big Bang Theory, who's socially awkward, who's has no filter and doesn't care about other people's feelings. It's harder for that linear left brain person to adapt and want to adapt into that touchy feely type of stuff. But the more that we can learn about it, the better that we can be in growing our businesses.
Even thinking about it from the perspective of not even necessarily the touchy-feely stuff, but you hear a lot about performance management in organizations, the importance of it. And, you've got to have these quarterly check-ins, and you've got to work with your direct reports to establish goals and all these things. It's this very structured, sort of rote, repetitive kind of behavior. But the emotional intelligence component of it is just interact with them like people and have conversations and have regular conversations and disclose your expectations and, make sure that you're actually communicating in a way so that everyone feels included and up to date on things that are going on. And then all this performance management stuff actually goes out the window. It is just happening because it's part of your culture. So to me, that's a component of emotional intelligence. When I see someone roll their eyes, when I use that phrase, to me, that's one of those places that I go. Because a lot of people are like, oh yeah, well, performance management, well, that's obviously critically important.
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence, maybe not,
What are the KPIs we're trying to hit here?
Exactly.
You sound like snows. So I think Brian touched on a very good point, and this is the way it was taught to me years ago. So like one of my first management roles was working in a restaurant, being an assistant kitchen manager, and like working with people who are like 19, 20 years old, who are a rough cut bunch of pirates. If you ever read the Anthony Bourdain book, people who work in kitchens are going to be very interesting individuals. And I remember the chef coming up to me one time. He goes, all right, Nick, I want you to walk your shift. I was like, okay, you just want me to walk around and, make sure the floors are clean. There's no, like things are labeled the date. He's like, no, I want you to walk your shift. I'm like, well, chef, I'm sorry. I don't really understand what you're doing. I can physically walk around here. What are you trying to get at? He's like, no, every day when you're in here, he's like, I want you to walk around and talk to everybody and have genuine conversations with them like they're human beings. He's like, have a real quick 5-minute conversation. Find out who someone's kids are. Walk over here. Is this person going to school? What are they doing at school? Have a genuine interest in them as individuals and care about them, and then they will care about you. They will do anything they need to do for you if you genuinely care about them. And for me, that's all emotional intelligence is. It's just genuinely caring about the people that you work with, right? As soon as you understand as a leader that you work for the people that you're managing, not the other way around, that emotional intelligence comes out so much easier than trying to force it on, just in my opinion.
So yes, when we have that servant leadership approach. So when I think of emotional intelligence, and I'm thinking of one word. What is the biggest killer of emotional intelligence, or what stops somebody from embracing emotional intelligence? There's one word I'm thinking has 3 letters in it.
It's going to be the what do you think there, Brian?
One word, 3 letters. Okay, well,
and we all have it. And we all have it.
Ego.
Ego. Our ego gets in the way. Our ego stops us from really accepting emotional intelligence. I had a guy in one of my sessions in Minnesota, and I knew I'd recognized him before, and he's an attorney who's a CPA who is the smartest guy in the room. Just ask him. And he'll tell you he's the smartest guy in the room. And I think this is worthy of your time. And it was just like, he has absolutely no emotional intelligence because it's all about him and not about everybody else.
Yep.
Well, I think that can go back to that same sense of divide when you're talking about, millennials versus whatever other generational demographic. As long as there's an us and them mentality instead of a we mentality, then that's that part that's getting fed, right? It's the ego. It's I've got the title. I've got these years of experience. These things make me important. From a societal perspective, we're all pack animals, right? I mean, we thrive on having some kind of gratification with that status. And so the more emotionally intelligent you become, the more you're able to check your ego at the door and recognize that there's probably a lot to be learned if I actually close my mouth and listen. And I think it cuts both ways. There's certainly plenty of younger generational people I've met who are very cavalier and confident because they just figured something out. So therefore they must know everything. Right?
Nick?
Yeah, I think you just described me at 19 years old. I'll stand in the back of this truck while we do 50. It's fine. Yeah, and I think I would agree with Brian. That left brain mentality. You kind of, or when you're used to being that smartest person in the room, you have to be able to just sit there and let people fully flush out ideas before you say anything. It's the listening to hear what somebody's saying instead of waiting to respond, right? Thinking about what your next response is. It's truly being open and understanding that never is any right or wrong answer. There's just a different answer. And that's my opinion. And, I'll go back to another thing too. When we're talking about this, you got to be vulnerable a little bit, right? One thing I always like to tell people who work for me, with me, is things that I've screwed up. I've screwed up a number of things. Like, how about the one time I accidentally tripped over a server room cable and took the whole office internet down for 25 minutes. But the time I shut a server off and go, this will turn back on, and it never turned back on. So, I always like to share with people, I make mistakes. I'm human. Therefore, I'm not expecting you to be perfect in here. And part of that, with that mentality, is when you have to be right, you have a hard time being vulnerable because, you have to be right. But I would say, let's just share something that everybody's kind of messed up. Let's have a fail fest right now, and just go over everything you failed with, kind of open up and get everyone kind of comfortable with each other, to get used to the idea that you don't have to be right and that you can mess things up. And everybody messes everything up. If somebody works in technology and has told you that they have never screwed something up, they are lying to you.
But that's an interesting point, Nick, because, I think the key attribute of emotional intelligence to be able to disclose things in that way is having that implicit trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that it's okay to be able to disclose those things, particularly in technology, because we work in an industry where the expectation is there's total fault tolerance, right? I mean, there's just no margin for error in things. And, to admit that you screw up can sometimes cost you your job, right? Or at least get you demoted to a desk in the basement. But when you do have a high degree of emotional intelligence and it spans the entire team, that's when you're really able to be capable of having those conversations where you can say something like, hey, here's the mistake I made. I wanted to make sure that you're aware of it.
Well, if we had a fail fest, we don't have enough time on this podcast for me to even start. This would be like an 18-hour, 14 different segment piece. But, I have to commend you two. I didn't realize you were both excellent improvisers. Because
I try. I'm a janitor,
Yeah, that's right.
A lowly janitor, humble janitor.
But in improv, I mean, Nick said it, and we it's listening to understand versus listening to respond.
Mm-hmm.
And in improv, it's about suspending judgment. Otherwise, leave your ego at the door. And in improv, it's about being vulnerable. In improv, it's not about me; it's about the team. Everything that you guys have said up to this point has resonated in my world of improv, and most people don't realize it. But when I sit there and dissect it, they go, "Oh, well, that's cool." Then I go, "Well, do you want to get up on stage in a theater?" And then they shut right down. But I'd rather have those folks out there going, "Okay, now I'm aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now let me use it," versus I'm just kind of blindly doing this. And you guys have just demonstrated tremendously.
Wow. Well, that says a lot coming from an improv master like yourself. Oh, thank you.
Everybody I meet, let me rephrase that. 93% of the people that I meet are improvisers. They just don't realize it. Nobody has explained it to them. That remaining percentage will never become improvisers because it's about them. It's about their ego. And it's about what's in it for them, not what's in it for the group. So those who, and then it's fun to watch when I mention it, because it is a leadership tool that's really, this environment is where it'll thrive. It wasn't going to thrive in the 70s and 80s and 90s. But now that we've morphed into this over the last 20 years, it's become a much more powerful tool in the workplace. If we can get past corporate culture and the ego and be vulnerable, which is so extremely difficult in corporate America these days.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. I'll share a little anecdote here, Peter. Since first meeting you, I've been turning my son on to improv, and of course, I have to be cautious about which content I'm exposing him to, since he is 11.
Yeah.
But something
that was the internet, Brian. It's all over.
Hey, baby, I control his internet. But my wife is Thai, and Thai people. In Thailand, there's pretty much one guy who's a stand-up comic, because it's not really, something that is, culturally, common. The idea of, exposing yourself in that way, in Asian culture in general, where it's more about, you kind of fade into the group.
Right.
So it was interesting because we found this Canadian improv troupe that does everything, family friendly. And we were watching one of these episodes, and me and my son were just having the greatest time. And my wife could not figure out where the joke was. And it was a lot of fun, kind of getting to explain it to her and see her start to open up to it, because the idea from her perspective that, you would just kind of be riffing off of each other, and that this thing would constantly be evolving, rather than, it's a joke that is told with a beginning, middle, and end.
Right.
Right. It was pretty interesting seeing how eye-opening that was. So I just thought that would be a little fun thing to share.
I appreciate that, and it is. I so love improv, because when you're doing it for theatrical purposes or on stage, and there's an audience that you want to make them laugh, the word "and" can bring the audience to its knees in how it's being used. And there is no, per se, script. It's all, but when you do stand-up comedy, you write stand-up comedy, it's the premise and the punchline and the tags. And there is a structure there, where in improv, there isn't a structure. And when you start studying improv and learning that the principles are really business tools, it makes the corporate workplace a lot more fun. But you have to have everybody else buying in on it. You just can't be the only one trying to do it and then going, who's this crazy guy?
That's right. My wife would be the one in the office who's the one who doesn't get it.
Yeah. right. That we shouldn't be laughing and having fun at work. This is serious stuff. It is serious, but if we want to get through the day and be sane, we should be able to have some fun. And this is not about, telling jokes like a priest, a rabbi, and Bill Clinton walk into a bar. I did not walk into that bar. I did not walk into that bar. It's not about that, because you've offended 3 different groups of people. It's about an attitude. It's about a mindset. As Nick said, he didn't take himself seriously. He's the janitor. But are you serious about your work? Absolutely. But you don't take yourself too seriously, and you're vulnerable. And if we could devise a drug or something that people could take or realize, and I think it's an improv class. My improv coach said a long time ago, if everybody took one improv class, this world would be a better place.
Mm-hmm.
And to get everybody to buy in on that concept. So I challenge you guys to go take an improv class.
Challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted.
Take your 11-year-old son with you to it. Now that he's still, kind of, dad's the smartest guy in the world. Versus I try to get my 17-year-old son to go with me. Dad, really? Go with you to do what?
Want to be seen with my dad?
Dad, right? Yeah. So
and then you'll surprise him and pull up TikTok and film the whole thing, right?
Brian, could you translate for me? What's a TikTok? Is that a clock?
No, TikTok is probably the number one growing social media platform there.
Okay,
just for some time. Just that makes it feel extra old.
So both of you just called me grandpa. I appreciate that. and there are times that I am. There's times that I know enough. I'm not my wife boss years ago, and she was with Macy's for 35 years. So later in her career, her boss called her technologically Amish. I'm far beyond that, but probably not up to your guys' level. Willing to learn.
It's okay. I had someone who was a recent college graduate who didn't know how to use Excel at one point in time. So it's just not it. It just runs the whole gambit. Just because someone's an older generation or younger doesn't mean they don't know technology or know technology better. Just in my experience, I've had the phone call where somebody told me they couldn't get the foot pedal on the computer to work.
Oh my goodness.
And that would be the computer mouse on the floor. So you get support tickets, you have to try to not laugh. But things are real. It happens.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. I can't get the foot pedal on my computer to work.
Oh yeah, if you ever want a good laugh, just look at the system admin subreddit on Reddit. There's some very interesting support calls on there. But
I think it was, when I think of technology, I think if you're not used to it, you're fearful of it. Mm-hmm. And it's getting past that fear and wanting to learn. Mm-hmm. And realize you're going to, it takes time. You're not going to learn just like that. We don't learn anything just like that. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
But it's technology, and people want, and if they don't, I don't want my IT desk is, he's 19 years old and he's upstairs and he tried, I don't know if my wife's going to listen to this or not. Oh, well, what the hell? He's trying to get her to become more technically savvy, and she just throws her hands up like, I don't want to deal with it. It's like, well, you kind of got to. I guess you don't have to, but the more that you know, and the more that you're on social media, the more you can hear the conversation out there that you should be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. Most people are actually far more curious than they may believe themselves to be. And when it comes to technology, it's almost like that curiosity gets shelved because it's more, it's a lot more safe. If I don't go exploring with this thing, and what happens if I break it?
Right.
But the funny thing is, we're all inherently curious. We're all moving towards wanting to gather more information about things, and I try to use that as one of those perception breakers, you know, for folks who find themselves really hung up about playing around with technology. It's use the same curiosity that you would have in just having a conversation with someone you just met, right? It's
Right.
exploring in that exact same way.
Yep.
That comes in with the vulnerability, because when most people want to ask, they don't want to seem like they're coming across as they're stupid. So a lot of the reason why they don't ask a lot of questions. I still remember I had I interviewed this woman. Her name was Jody Padar. She's a CPA in Chicago, but she's very technically savvy. And she was talking about bots a couple of years ago. We're going bots going to be the big one. What I said, Jody, what the hell's a bot? And she laughed and she goes, I thought I told you that on the last time you interviewed me. And then she goes, I think she said, do you know what blockchain is? I said, yeah, it's an intestinal disorder. Well, what is it? But as I've said, as I've gone, okay, you know what? I need to understand this stuff. So I've tried to learn more about it over the years. But I see a lot, I mean, you guys are up to speed with this, but I see a lot of people in the accounting world particularly go, this is a fad. We're never going to, and I'm like, guys, you know, it's here. Artificial intelligence in the workplace is here. Artificial intelligence is sitting on, I've got one here and I got one back there. I'm not going to say her name because she always answers me. He starts with an A. And then I got some home over here that, you know, kind of bounce them off each other, give them equal time. But, you know, I think the more that we embrace technology, the more productive and curious we become.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, artificial intelligence, which is a whole thing within itself. I always tell people, you know, when AI is the big buzzword now, right? But I equate the word AI to like saying a car, right? There's parts in a car that are separate all on its own. There's a transmission, there's a gear shifter, there's all this, but you don't refer to each part component itself, right? You just refer to the whole device as a car. Well, AI is kind of like that. There's components of it. There's computer vision, there's geographic information systems, there's machine learning. So it's kind of, AI is kind of like this big term that the media likes to use, but it's kind of like saying, you know, you went to college at the University of Kentucky, but you know, there's all these different minors and majors you can do. There's more to it than just going to that school.
Yes, there was. but Nick, you just did. I mean, you did a very good job of creating an analogy, telling a story about something that's more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of folks have a hard time, especially when they understand a complex language, to put it in a context that someone who doesn't have that language can understand.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've always thought of AI. Well, my first interaction with AI was Allen Iverson during watching him on a press conference about practice. But outside of
practice,
yeah, talking about practice. But then when I think AI, I think it in totality like I think of a car.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But this is the first time somebody's ever explained it to me. Like, oh, there's more than that.
Yeah, because you know, like your assistant you got there back on your desk. I'm not going to say it in case anyone's listening in their car or something or on their phone. You know, that has natural language processing in it, which takes the context of what you're saying to try to figure out what you're requesting, which is a part of artificial intelligence. And you know, I can explain blockchain to you real quick too. You want to know what blockchain is in a nutshell? Sure. I have a piece of paper. You have a piece of paper. Brian has a piece of paper. All right, and now we can each write Change Your Mindset podcast on it, right? I write that, you write that, Brian writes that. Now let's check and verify that. Did you write that on your piece of paper? Did Brian write that on a piece of paper? Did I write that piece of paper? Boom, that's blockchain. We just verified everything. We wrote everything on a ledger, we wrote it down, and then we all agreed that that's what we wrote, and it's exactly the same. That's blockchain.
I got to go back and listen to this episode again. I mean, I kid you not. That is probably the most simplest way. And I don't mean that in a bad way.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a lot more complicated but in a nutshell, that's basically, it's a distributed ledger where we go back and verify that each node, which is you're a node, I'm a node, Brian's a node, writing this information, we verify that what was written is correct. And if anyone comes back to us to verify the information, we go, hey, Nick, what did you write? Is that what you wrote? Hey, Peter, what did you write? Is that what's there? Mm-hmm. Hey, Brian, what did you write? Is that there? And if one of them is wrong, then something's wrong with the system. So blockchain won't let that happen because it has all the checks and balances. But That's it in a nutshell. So you don't have to worry anymore.
So just on a side note, you need to write an article on explaining blockchain. I'm saying write about explaining blockchain just the way you did, and submit it to an accounting and finance organization or a national accounting and finance organization, because most people out there don't have a clue.
Which is funny, because blockchain is probably more analogous to accounting systems than just about anything else.
Right, exactly. And I mean, the way I've kind of got to understand is, as if we look at blockchain from a supply chain issue. So you know, some said you catch a tuna out in the Indian Ocean, you geotag it, you bring it in, you geotag it, and you follow that trail all the way back. So when I'm sitting there eating my sushi, well, where did this come from? Literally, I probably could figure out where that fish, what's the trend, how did it get from there to here, and make sure it's verified. And I know that Walmart just recently said that they're mandating that their leafy supply chain, as in romaine lettuce, that they've mandated blockchain to be part of the process.
Yeah,
I know a little bit more than I thought.
You know a lot. And then
don't wrap your ego up around being a node.
There you go. So the biggest thing with blockchain is trust, right? You have to trust each of the nodes, right? That where you're writing this information. And that's one of the big sticking points, right? Is where these consortiums and things have broken off. It's like, okay, well, can we trust this over here? We're going to set these things to trust, you know, Ethereum, we're going to put contracts in that. So it just has grown from there. But, it's just basically in a nutshell, almost like dual entry accounting.
This is triple entry accounting.
Triple.
But you said the word. It's trust. Yep. Because we've lost trust in the banking system. Thus, cryptocurrency was born, and because I've read a few things along those lines and listened to some stuff about how that came about, and why Target and Home Depot, why they got hacked, and all that information went away, because there's a one central server, or in a blockchain community, nobody owns it. It's spread around, and it's much harder to hack when it's not all in one central location. Nick's so those of you who are not seeing, Nick's looking at me.
Brian looked like he was going to reply, so
yeah. No, Nick was looking at me going, I don't what? Let's defer to Brian then.
Sorry, I've got my Bitcoin pinging me over here on Messenger.
Odd fact, I lost maybe 20 Bitcoin on a hard drive somewhere. When it first came out and they published it on GitHub, I put it up on a PC and ran it overnight, wound up with 20 Bitcoin, and I don't know, maybe my mom sent that hard drive to the Goodwill or something like that. This would have been forever ago, Brian, when they first published it, and they put it out, and I just messed with it, and now, like, you'd have to spend so much money and power, it's not even worth your time to mine it.
That's true. But that must have been a pretty valuable hard drive.
I don't even know where it is, Brian.
Bill Gates has it somewhere. He found it.
Yeah, I don't know. Somebody probably shot it with a gun or something. Picked up the thrift store, burned it. Who knows?
So as we begin to wrap up, guys, the co-host of Lead.exe, what final words do you have for my audience?
I would say just be vulnerable. Run towards failure and do things that scare you and do them often.
Ooh, I like that. Brian?
Love and laughter. They're words to live by.
So how do we love and laugh in a workplace who may not see the value of that?
It's more about you seeing the value of it, I think, because you can work with a lot of jerks. And the fact is, the only way it's going to upset you is if you allow it to. So love and laughter, recognize them for where they're at, be thankful that that's not you, and make sure that you get a good giggle out of it every once in a while when you think about, man, that guy's got some bad karma coming his
way. So where can everybody get in contact with you guys and find your podcast?
Sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn I accept pretty much every, connection request. Oddly enough, somebody asked me to buy them Bitcoin today, so I'm just gonna go ahead and on connect with them. But so I'm on LinkedIn. But if you send me one, connection request, as long as you're not trying to get me to buy a cryptocurrency, I will accept. You can Lead.exe.com, and we'll shoot you all the information for that. And you can find our podcast on all the podcasting platforms: Apple, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher. We also publish on YouTube as well too.
Cool. How can people find you, Brian?
Yeah, same. LinkedIn. It's really the go-to spot. So, and then all the other places that Nick just rattled off for the podcast. There you be.
Ditto.
Yeah, exactly. Just ditto. Well, guys, I appreciate you taking time. It's been a blast. I had a blast on your podcast. I wish you guys great success in the podcast and what you do. And I can't wait till our paths actually cross and we're physically across from each other. That will be a hoot.
Hey, it's gonna be a blockchain kind of improv. I can feel it.
Hey, we should actually do a live stream and call it that and see if anybody joins, right?
A blockchain improv. All right.
Blockchain
That's
improv. Hosted by a janitor, the accidental accountant,
and a musician.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, what the hell is this thing?
Okay, you guys are great. I thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and I look forward to our paths crossing soon.
Same, Peter. Thank you.